Throughout the course of modern history, the world has faced its share of serial killers whose crimes push the limits of horror. Some names chill us because of their brutality, the sheer number of victims, or the twisted workings of their minds. But there is one name that haunts us, not only because of the savagery involved, but because to this day, no one truly knows who he was. That name is Jack the Ripper, a man who slipped through the hands of justice and vanished into the fog, leaving behind a trail of mutilated bodies and more than a century's worth of unanswered questions. Today, we're going to explore the question, why was Jack the Ripper never caught? So fasten your seatbelt as we dive into today's mystery. But first, you'll have incredible luck if you like and subscribe before this video ends. By the end of the 19th century, London was a city bursting at the seams, not only with people, but with the stark divisions between its social classes. Behind the polished facade of grand architecture and impeccably dressed elites lay a harsh reality that many preferred not to see. Slums were beginning to take root, and among them, none stood out more than the East End, the most impoverished area in all of London at the time. Within it sat Whitechapel, a district where darkness reigned in both the literal and figurative sense. Narrow alleys, damp and reeking of rot, formed a grim maze where thousands of poor laborers, immigrants, and society's outcasts lived side by side. In a world riddled with injustice, immigrants, especially Jewish communities and those from Eastern Europe, often became scapegoats for nearly every misfortune. They were accused of stealing jobs, overcrowding the already cramped housing, and even blamed for the rising tide of crime. Meanwhile, the London police were struggling to keep pace with a growing criminal underworld, and they were doing it with almost nothing in their arsenal. No fingerprints, no DNA testing, no psychological profiling. Just handcuffs, truncheons, and the faint glow of gas lamps. It was in this chaotic social backdrop that a killer began to emerge. He didn't just take lives, he openly challenged the entire justice system of an empire. And more terrifying still, he seemed to know that in a city where life was cheap, death didn't command much attention either. Throughout the autumn of 1888, at least 5 women fell victim to Jack the Ripper. They would come to be known as the Canonical Five. Their names were Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes, and Mary Jane Kelly. Each name carried its own tragedy, but they were united by one grim commonality, a brutal end beneath the blade of a faceless killer. Every crime scene revealed chilling precision. The victims' throats were deeply slashed, with blood splattered across nearby walls. Their abdomens were torn open, and internal organs, such as the uterus and kidneys, had been removed with a level of accuracy that suggested at least a basic knowledge of anatomy or a familiarity with the dissection of corpses. In some instances, flesh had been carefully excised in a way that hinted at surgical experience or something disturbingly close to it. But it did not end there. In several cases, the killer had mutilated the genital area in a manner so savage that the resulting images haunted newspapers and street corners alike. Even in a city well acquainted with the horrors of crime, the public shuddered at the black and white photos of the corpses. Sensationalist tabloids only deepened the hysteria, with lurid headlines that transformed Whitechapel into a dead zone in the collective psyche of Victorian England. In this atmosphere, every scream in the night, every flicker of a shadow in a narrow alley felt like the beginning of another tragedy, a sign that Jack the Ripper was still out there, brutal and unknowable. From the very first days after the initial murder, London's police force realized they were dealing with a crime unlike any they had encountered before. A calculated, merciless killer who acted with a level of cold detachment that bordered on inhuman. And so began one of the largest criminal investigations in the history of England. More than 2,000 individuals were questioned, over 300 were placed under close surveillance, and at least 80 suspects were temporarily arrested and interrogated. Officers searched homes, inspected boarding houses, and scoured every alley of the East End. In an effort to encourage the public to come forward with information, authorities publicly offered monetary rewards and appealed for cooperation from all walks of life. It wasn't just the official police force that joined the hunt. Amateur detectives, journalists, and ordinary citizens all threw themselves into the chase for the phantom known as Jack the Ripper. Given the precision with which internal organs were removed and the clean incisions on the bodies, the police quickly narrowed their focus to individuals with anatomical knowledge. butchers, surgeons, and medical students. Authorities also paid special attention to those living or working near the murder sites. Yet despite their efforts, the suspect list only grew longer, and no real breakthroughs came. The core problem was that police at the time lacked any modern investigative tools. There was no DNA testing, no fingerprinting system, no surveillance cameras, and certainly no digital tracking methods like we rely on today. They couldn't digitally reconstruct a crime scene, compare evidence through centralized databases, or generate a suspect profile using criminal psychology. None of that existed. To make matters worse, public trust in law enforcement was at an alarmingly low level. Many working-class residents of Whitechapel had no faith in the police. Some remained silent, while others actively misled investigators, whether out of fear of retribution or simply because they were used to living in a world where violence went unpunished and protection was never guaranteed. In such conditions, the police investigation began to feel futile. And as each new murder added to the growing list of horrors, a grim realization took hold. The police weren't just chasing a killer, they were grappling with a symbol of fear that their entire system was powerless to contain. More than a century has passed since the gruesome murders that shook the Whitechapel district, and yet the name Jack the Ripper remains an enduring symbol of mystery. Because of that, the list of suspects has grown so extensive over time that it's nearly impossible to count. From the mentally unstable to scholars, from working-class men to royal nobility, all have, at some point, fallen under suspicion. The following are among the most notable names ever included on that list. The first suspect is Montague John Druitt, one of the earliest individuals seriously considered by police at the time. Druitt was a barrister and a school teacher, but he also reportedly struggled with mental health issues. Shortly after what was believed to be the Ripper's final murder, Druitt's body was discovered floating in the River Thames under strange circumstances. His family confirmed that he had exhibited signs of mental instability, and the timing of his disappearance aligned precisely with the Ripper's sudden vanishing. The coincidence led many to believe that Jack the Ripper may have ended his own life by the banks of the Thames. The second suspect is Soren Kwiatkowski, better known by his anglicized name, George Chapman. A Polish immigrant to England, he worked as a barber and later posed as a doctor. He poisoned 3 of his wives and was eventually hanged in 1903. While his method of murder was entirely different from the Ripper's, his residence in the Whitechapel area and a history of violence in his relationships led some to theorize that he may have once been the Ripper before transitioning to a new style of killing. The third suspect is James Maybrick. His name became a sensation in 1992 when a diary surfaced in Liverpool that was allegedly written by him. In it, the author detailed a series of murders committed out of jealousy, ending with the chilling line, "Yours truly, Jack the Ripper." Maybrick was a wealthy merchant, known to have psychological issues and a history of arsenic use. However, the authenticity of the diary has long been hotly debated, making Maybrick a suspicious yet ultimately unverified candidate. The fourth suspect is Michael Ostrog. Nicknamed the Mad Russian by the police, Ostrog was a professional criminal with a record of fraud, theft, and erratic behavior. He once impersonated a military doctor and was institutionalized in a mental hospital. Although his records are riddled with inconsistencies and there is no definitive evidence placing him in London during the time of the murders, his unstable mind and habit of posing as a doctor kept his name on the suspect list for years. The fifth suspect is Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence. No suspect has stirred as much curiosity or apprehension as this one. A grandson of Queen Victoria, Prince Albert was rumored to have suffered from syphilis, which some claim led to madness and death in a mental asylum. One theory suggests that the Ripper murders were covered up at the highest levels of power, and that if the prince were revealed to be the killer, it would have triggered an unprecedented political crisis in British history. However, many historians have dismissed this theory, citing evidence that places him outside of London at the time of the killings. The sixth suspect is Aaron Kosminski, one of the most scientifically supported suspects in the modern era. Kosminski was a Polish barber living in Whitechapel and was later institutionalized for mental illness. In 2014, a DNA study on a shawl allegedly belonging to one of the victims found a genetic match with Kosminski's descendants. Though the results have been questioned due to the unclear chain of custody of the evidence, it remains the first piece of genetic material ever linked to a Ripper suspect, reigniting public interest in his name. The seventh suspect is Karl Feigenbaum, a German sailor who once confessed to having urges to kill and mutilate women. After leaving England, he traveled to the United States, where he was arrested for the murder of a woman in New York. He was executed in the electric chair, and his attorney later declared that Karl was, in fact, Jack the Ripper. and that he had used his travels by sea to escape the crime scenes after each killing. The eighth suspect is Lewis Carroll, the famed author of Alice in Wonderland. Carroll came under suspicion due to cryptic metaphors found in his diaries and letters, which some interpreted as references to the murders. However, these allegations largely stem from fringe researchers pursuing extreme theories with little to no concrete evidence. The academic community has broadly dismissed Carroll as a plausible suspect. Each of these names has, at one time or another, been connected to Jack the Ripper, but ultimately, despite countless investigations and re-examinations of old files, no one has ever been able to say with certainty that they've uncovered the true identity of the Whitechapel Phantom. In the history of modern crime, few murderers have ever reached the near-mythical status of Jack the Ripper. So why was he never caught? One of the most famous and controversial theories is that Jack the Ripper wasn't just an ordinary man, but someone with power. Perhaps even someone from within the British aristocracy or royal family. The name Prince Albert Victor, grandson of Queen Victoria, was once heavily scrutinized for this very reason. The theory suggests that if the killer truly were of royal blood, arresting and prosecuting him would have sparked an unprecedented political crisis, one that could have severely shaken public confidence in the monarchy at a time when trust was already eroding. In that context, covering up the truth may have been seen as the safest option. Beyond questions of privilege, what made Jack the Ripper so elusive was his almost preternatural ability to vanish. He struck under the cover of darkness in narrow alleys and tightly packed slums where no one paid attention if a woman went missing for a few hours. After each killing, he seemed to know exactly when and how to flee the scene without leaving a trace. In a city of more than 4 million people living in poor and chaotic conditions, this wasn't impossible, just calculated. To truly understand why the case proved unsolvable, it must be placed in its historical context. In 1888, criminal investigation was still in its infancy. There was no DNA testing, no fingerprint database, no surveillance cameras, no criminal profiling, not even reliable methods for preserving a crime scene. Police relied almost entirely on witness testimony or catching someone in the act. And clearly, Jack the Ripper took full advantage of these limitations, always staying one step ahead of law enforcement. Another factor was the status of the victims themselves. Most were poor women working as prostitutes. In the eyes of many at the time, they weren't seen as innocent victims, but rather as symptoms of what was called the moral decay of the East End. Had the victims belonged to the middle or upper classes, public pressure and investigative efforts might have looked very different. One theory even asks, was Jack the Ripper truly a single person? On at least one night, 2 victims were discovered less than an hour apart. This led to speculation that perhaps there were 2 killers operating together, or that one man had acted with unprecedented audacity. If there were in fact 2 murderers, it could explain inconsistencies in the methods and behavioral patterns between the crimes, and why the investigation never produced a clear profile. All these elements combined to create the perfect environment for evil to hide. Jack the Ripper was not merely a killer, he was a product of his time, born from inequality, legal blind spots, and a society steeped in contradiction and fear. More than a century has passed since Jack the Ripper unleashed terror on the shadowy streets of Whitechapel, yet his real name has never appeared in any criminal record. We know how he killed, we know the stories of his unfortunate victims, and we know the fear that gripped the city of London in 1888. But we don't know who he was, where he came from, or why he stopped. And perhaps it's that eternal silence that has made him one of the greatest mysteries in modern history. Who do you think Jack the Ripper really was? Was he a powerful man protected by the veil of royal secrecy? Or simply a madman lurking in the darkness of a city drowning in despair? Which theory do you believe? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you found today's story thought-provoking, or if you'd like to join us in uncovering more of history's unsolved mysteries, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll be back with more strange and haunting journeys. See you in the next video.